The day I came home from the hospital, I expected nothing more than silence in my own bed. Instead, my key would not turn. I stood on my porch in Columbus with a discharge bracelet still around my wrist, knocking on the door my husband and I had paid for over 30 years. Then my son Ethan opened it only a few inches. "You can't come in, Mom," he said. "You shouldn't be living alone now." Behind him, I saw one of my suitcases by the hallway wall. My grandson Caleb stood farther back, pale and terrified. That was when I remembered my late husband Daniel's warning, "Never sign anything about this house unless you know exactly what it means." Ethan thought changing the locks would make me powerless. He had no idea what Daniel had hidden in the trust. If this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Would you have knocked again or called the police? Before Ethan changed those locks, I had spent 36 years believing that house was the safest place in the world. It was a small red brick home on a quiet street in Columbus, Ohio, with white shutters that Daniel repainted every spring, whether they needed it or not. The front porch sagged a little on the left side. The maple tree in the yard had grown so wide that its branches touched the roof by late summer. There was nothing grand about the house. It was not the kind of home anyone would stop their car to admire. But it was ours. Daniel and I bought it when we were both in our early 30s. Back then, we had more hope than money. I worked as an administrative assistant at a public elementary school, answering phones, filing paperwork, and comforting children who had forgotten their lunch or lost a mitten. Daniel worked long hours as an accountant for a manufacturing company outside the city. We saved for that house one small sacrifice at a time. We did not take expensive vacations. We drove used cars until they could barely make it through another Ohio winter. We cooked at home, packed our lunches, and learned to fix whatever we could before calling someone else. Daniel repaired the kitchen cabinets himself. I stripped wallpaper from the hallway for 3 straight weekends. We painted the nursery together before Ethan was born, though we did not know then whether we were having a boy or a girl. The first time I stepped inside after we got the keys, I stood in the empty living room and cried. Daniel laughed softly and put his arms around me from behind. "You're crying already?" he asked. "I'm not crying," I told him. "I'm just thinking. Thinking about that this is the first place nobody can tell us to leave." He kissed the side of my head and said, "Then we'll make sure it stays that way." For years, that was exactly what we did. Ethan learned to walk across that living room floor. He took his first unsteady steps between the coffee table and Daniel's open arms, laughing so hard he fell onto his diapered bottom. He learned to ride a bicycle on our driveway with Daniel running behind him, one hand gripping the back of the seat. He came home from school and dropped his backpack by the same kitchen chair every afternoon. He carved his initials into the old wooden fence when he was 12. He brought his high school girlfriend to dinner in that dining room, blushing so hard he could barely look at me. Even after he became an adult, the house remained the center of our family. Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas mornings, birthday cakes, Easter baskets for Caleb, Sunday afternoons when Daniel grilled chicken in the backyard and Ethan complained about work while Melissa sat beside him smiling politely but looking distracted. And then, after Daniel died, the house became something else. It became the place where I could still feel him. Daniel had been gone for 6 years by the time Ethan changed the locks. 6 years, and I still sometimes reached for the other side of the bed before remembering there was no one there. I still found myself buying his favorite coffee by habit. I still paused in the hallway whenever I passed the framed photograph of us standing in front of that house on the day we moved in. I was not clinging to bricks and wood. I was clinging to a life I had built with my own hands. After the funeral, several people gently suggested that I sell the house. "You could get a smaller place," they said. "You wouldn't have so much to maintain. You could move closer to Ethan." But I never wanted to leave, not because I was stubborn, not because I was afraid of change. I stayed because the house was where I knew who I was. I knew which floorboard creaked outside the bathroom. I knew where Daniel kept spare batteries. I knew how the sunlight crossed the kitchen table at 4 in the afternoon. I knew every crack in the driveway, every flower bed, every drawer full of old family photographs. And I believed Ethan understood that. For most of his life, he had been a good son. He was not perfect, no child is, but he used to be thoughtful. When Daniel was sick, Ethan drove him to appointments when I was too exhausted to drive. He fixed the porch railing after a storm. He came over one winter evening with groceries when he thought I had the flu. After Daniel died, Ethan checked on me every week. At least he did in the beginning. He would call and say, "Mom, you need anything from the store?" or "I'm in the neighborhood. Want me to stop by?" Sometimes he brought Caleb over, and that little boy would run through the front door like the house belonged to him too. Those were the moments that made me believe our family was still strong. But things started changing after Ethan's renovation business began to struggle. At first, he did not say much about it. He would shrug when I asked how work was going. "Slow," he would say. Then slow became delayed payments. Delayed payments became angry calls. Angry calls became long silences during family dinners. I noticed little things before I understood what they meant. He stopped buying gifts for birthdays. He started showing up late. He was always checking his phone, his jaw tight, his eyes somewhere else. One Sunday afternoon, he sat at my kitchen table while I made coffee. I could hear him on the phone in the next room speaking in a low voice. I said, "I'm working on it," he snapped. "You'll get your money." When he saw me standing in the doorway, he ended the call immediately. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," he said too quickly. That was Ethan's favorite word whenever something was clearly not fine. Melissa changed too, though in a quieter way. She never openly said she wanted me out of my house. Not then. But she began making comments that unsettled me. "This place is a lot for one person," she said once while looking around my living room. Another time she said, "You know there are some really lovely senior apartments near us. They have activities and transportation and everything." I smiled and told her I was happy where I was. She smiled back, but there was something behind it, a kind of calculation I could not name. Then there were the moments Ethan thought I did not see. Whenever he came over, his eyes would drift toward the built-in cabinet beside the dining room. That was where Daniel kept important papers, tax records, insurance information, old mortgage documents, the deed, at least until Daniel began working with an attorney to organize everything after his diagnosis. One evening I came into the dining room and found Ethan standing in front of that cabinet. "What are you looking for?" I asked. He turned so quickly that his shoulder bumped the door. "Nothing," he said. "You were standing in front of your father's files." I was just looking for the warranty information on the furnace. I knew that was not true. The furnace paperwork was in a labeled binder in the hallway closet. Ethan knew that too, but I let it go. That is the part that still hurts when I think about it. I let too many things go because I was his mother. Mothers are trained to explain away what breaks their hearts. We tell ourselves our children are stressed, they are tired, they are going through something. They did not mean it the way it sounded. I did not want to believe that my own son could look at the home where he grew up and see only a price tag. Daniel saw more than I did. A few months before he passed, when he was still strong enough to sit at his desk and organize papers, he asked me to come into his office. There was a blue folder on the desk in front of him. "I need you to remember something," he said. I tried to joke with him. "Daniel, you've made enough lists to run a small country." But he did not smile. "I'm serious, Laura." That was when I stopped laughing. He rested his hand on the blue folder and looked at me with an expression I had seen only a few times in our marriage, the look he wore when he knew something was coming that I did not want to face. "I've put protections in place," he said. "For you, for the house, for your future." I remember feeling irritated. "Why are you talking like I can't handle things? You can handle anything," he said quietly. "That's exactly why I need you to promise me you won't handle it alone." I asked him what he meant, but he only said, "Ethan knows some things, not everything." At the time, I thought he was referring to paperwork, maybe taxes, maybe insurance, maybe the trust I had signed without reading carefully because I trusted my husband more than any lawyer. I did not understand that Daniel had been trying to warn me, and standing outside my own locked front door with my suitcase waiting inside like I was a stranger, I finally began to wonder what Daniel had seen all those years ago. The morning I went to the hospital began like any other Tuesday. I had made oatmeal, watered the geraniums in my kitchen window, and written a grocery list in my spiral notebook. Nothing about that quiet morning warned me that before the day was over, someone else would be deciding whether I was allowed inside my own home. I was in the produce section at Kroger when a strange flutter started in my chest. A moment later, the floor seemed to shift beneath me. I grabbed the cart with both hands, but the dizziness came so quickly that I had to sit down. A young employee called 911. At Riverside Methodist, doctors ran tests and monitored my heart overnight. I had experienced an irregular heartbeat. It was not a heart attack, but they wanted to adjust my medication and make certain I was stable before sending me home. I called Ethan from the emergency room because no matter what uneasiness I had started to feel around him, he was still my son. He arrived less than an hour later with yellow daisies from the gift shop. His hair was messy, his coat half-zipped, and his face looked truly worried. He sat beside my bed, held my hand, and asked why I had not called sooner. "I didn't want to scare you," I said. "You're my mother," he told me. "You're allowed to scare me." For a moment, I felt ashamed of my doubts. Maybe the tension in him came from the pressure of his failing business, not from anything darker. Ethan stayed until late that night. The following morning, he brought my charger cardigan and reading glasses. He told me he had stopped by my house and made sure everything was secure. "Don't worry about anything at home," he said. "I'll handle it." I thanked him. That sentence haunted me later. On the second day, Melissa came with Caleb. Caleb sat near the window, unusually quiet. Normally, he would have told me stories about baseball practice or school. When I asked if he was all right, he glanced at Ethan before answering. "Yeah, Grandma, I'm fine." Ethan smiled at him, but it was not a warm smile. It was the kind adults give children when they want them to stop talking. By the third morning, Dr. Emily Carter said I was ready to go home. She changed one medication and told me to rest, drink water, and call her office if I felt another flutter. "Your heart needs watching," she said. "But you are doing well, Laura. You can recover at home." Recover at home. Those words mattered later because Ethan would act as though she had said exactly the opposite. He offered to pick me up. I was tired and wanted nothing more than my recliner, a blanket, and a cup of tea. The ride from the hospital was quiet. Ethan kept both hands on the steering wheel. When I asked how Caleb was doing, he said, "Fine." When I asked about his business, his jaw tightened. "Can we not talk about that today?" "Of course," I said. When we turned onto my street, I felt a wave of relief. Daniel's wind chime moved softly beneath the porch roof. For one brief second, everything looked normal. Then I saw my suitcase. It sat in the front hallway, visible through the narrow glass panel beside the door. It was the navy blue suitcase Daniel and I had taken to Florida for our 25th anniversary. My cream scarf was draped over the handle. "Why is my suitcase there?" I asked. Ethan did not answer. He helped me from this car, and I climbed the steps slowly. I pulled my house key from my bag. It would not turn. I tried again. Nothing. At first, I thought I had grabbed the wrong key. Then I looked at the worn brass key I had carried for 36 years, and coldness spread through me. "Ethan," I said, "why doesn't my key work?" He stepped in front of the door. "Mom, don't get upset. Why doesn't my key work?" He opened the door only a few inches. Behind him, I saw boxes stacked in the hallway. Some had my handwriting on the sides, but I had not packed them. The corner of my quilt was draped over a chair. "You can't come in right now," he said. I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "Melissa and I have been thinking about your safety. After what happened at the store, we don't think you should be alone." I laughed once because the words were too absurd to understand. "You changed the locks because I had an irregular heartbeat. It isn't only that. You've been forgetting things. That is not true. You left the stove on last month. I left a pot warming for 2 minutes while I answered the phone. You could have hurt yourself." My mouth went dry. He was taking small, ordinary moments from my life and turning them into evidence that I no longer had a right to it. Melissa appeared behind him. Her face was pale, and she would not meet my eyes. "It's temporary, Laura," she said, "until we figure out a better arrangement." "A better arrangement," I whispered. "This is my home." "Mom," Ethan said, his voice sharpening. "Please don't make this harder." Harder, as though I was the one standing on a porch with a hospital discharge bracelet while my son kept me from my own bed. I asked for my medication first. Then I asked for my purse identification checkbook insurance folder and the small velvet box from my dresser that held my wedding ring and the few pieces of jewelry Daniel had given me. Ethan's eyes flickered. "I'll bring those to you later." "No," I said. "Bring them out now. You need to calm down." "I am calm. I need my medication, Ethan." He glanced toward the driveway and lowered his voice. "You can stay with Denise for a couple of nights. We'll talk when you're feeling clearer." That was when I saw Caleb near the stairs. He held the strap of his backpack with both hands. His eyes met mine for a second, but it was enough. He was not merely worried about a sick grandmother. He was afraid. "Grandma," he whispered. Ethan turned toward him. "Caleb, go upstairs." But Caleb did not move. "Dad was in Grandpa Daniel's office," he said quickly. He opened all the drawers. He was looking for something. Ethan's face changed. "Caleb," he snapped. The boy flinched. And in that instant, I understood that my hospital stay had not been an emergency to my son. It had been an opportunity. By that evening, Ethan had already started telling relatives that I was confused, that I could not safely live alone, and that he was only trying to protect me. But I could not stop thinking about Caleb's frightened eyes. What had Ethan been searching for in Daniel's office? Denise Walker had been my best friend for nearly 40 years. The moment I called her from my porch, my voice cracked before I could explain what Ethan had done. "Stay right there," she said. "Do not argue with him. I'm coming." 20 minutes later, she pulled up in her old blue SUV, still wearing house slippers beneath a raincoat. She took one look at the locked door, at my hospital bracelet, at the suitcase visible through the narrow glass panel, and her face went pale. "Laura," she said, taking my arm. "Get in the car. I can't leave. My medication is in there. My purse, my papers, everything. I know. But you are not going to stand here begging your son for permission to enter your own house." That was when I finally got into the car. Denise made up the guest room, brought tea and crackers, and told me I could stay as long as I needed. But kindness could not make it feel like home. That night, I barely slept. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan standing behind that half-open door speaking to me as if I were a stranger who had wandered onto his property. "You need to calm down," he had said. The words kept repeating in my head. He had not said, "Mom, I'm sorry." He had not said, "Let's talk." He had spoken as though my pain was proof that I was unstable. At 2 a.m, I stood by Denise's window and told myself this had to be a mistake. By morning, Ethan would call. He would bring my keys, my medicine, and an apology. But morning came with 3 missed calls from relatives instead. The first was my sister-in-law, Marlene. When I returned her call, she sounded uneasy. "Laura, Ethan told us you had a bad episode." "What kind of episode?" "He said you were confused after the hospital. He said you didn't remember things, and he and Melissa were trying to keep you safe." For several seconds, I could not answer. Ethan had already built a story around me. He had made himself the worried son before I had even had the chance to tell anyone that he had locked me out. "I was not confused," I said. "I was discharged by my doctor. Ethan changed the locks while I was in the hospital." Marlene went quiet. Then she whispered, "Oh, Laura, I didn't know." Neither did I not until that moment how much Ethan needed people to doubt me. I called him right after that. He answered on the 4th ring. "Mom, I'm busy." "Busy doing what? Trying to handle everything." "You are not handling my life, Ethan. You are taking it from me." He let out a tired breath. "This is exactly what I mean. You're emotional. You're not thinking clearly. I need my medication, my ID, my keys, and my belongings. You'll get what you need. We'll talk when you calm down." Then he hung up. I sat at Denise's kitchen table staring at the phone. For a moment, I began to doubt myself. Manipulation does not always arrive as yelling. Sometimes it comes in a calm voice that tells you your own memory cannot be trusted. Then I remembered Dr. Emily Carter. I called her office and asked for a return call. She called me back within the hour. "Laura, how are you feeling?" she asked. "Physically, I'm fine, but I need to ask you something." I told her Ethan had claimed she said I should no longer live alone. I told her he had used my hospital stay as his reason for changing the locks. There was a long pause. "I never said that," Dr. Carter replied, her voice firm. "Your heart rhythm issue required observation, but you were medically cleared to return home. I did not say you were incapable of living independently." My eyes filled with tears. "Would you put that in writing?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "And Laura, please hear me clearly. A family member cannot turn a short hospital stay into proof that you have lost your right to make decisions." After we hung up, I cried. Not because I felt weak, but because someone had finally said the words I needed to hear. I was not confused. I was being lied about. That afternoon, Denise drove me to the police station. Officer Ryan Bennett listened while I explained the lockout, the medication, and documents still inside, and Ethan's claims that I could no longer take care of myself. He wrote down the dates of my hospital stay and the lockout. Then he leaned back and spoke carefully. "Mrs. Hernandez, because the house is held in a trust, this may involve a civil dispute. I cannot decide ownership or force entry right now, but I can document what happened." "I don't want to get my son arrested," I said. Officer Bennett nodded. "Making a report is not the same as declaring war. It means you are protecting yourself." He called Ethan from his desk. I heard only one side of the conversation. "Yes, Mr. Hernandez, I understand. Your mother reports she cannot access essential belongings, including medication and identification. You need to make arrangements to return those items." When he ended the call, he looked at me with quiet concern. "Your son says he's acting for your safety," he said. "He also says you have been forgetting things. He is trying to make me sound unreliable." "Then keep records," Officer Bennett said. "Every call, every message, every refusal. Dates matter." That night, Denise gave me an old notebook. On the first page, I recorded the hospital dates, the boxes in the hallway, my useless key, the withheld medication, and Ethan's exact words. At the top of the page, I wrote, "I know what happened." The next morning, my phone rang during school hours. It was Caleb. "Grandma," he whispered. "Caleb, sweetheart, are you okay?" "I'm at school." I borrowed my friend's phone. My heart began to race. "Why?" "Dad took my tablet. He said I'm not supposed to talk about the house." I closed my eyes. "What happened last night? Dad was in Grandpa Daniel's office again. He opened all the drawers. He was mad because he couldn't find something." "What was he looking for?" "A blue folder," Caleb said. Then he told Mom, "Once she signs, this is over." My hand tightened around the phone. Did he say what I'm supposed to sign? No. But he said you won't understand the papers anyway. For a moment, I could not breathe. Then Caleb whispered, "Grandma, I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner." "You have nothing to be sorry for," I said. "You did the right thing by calling me." Before he hung up, he added one last thing. Dad looked scared when he couldn't find the blue folder. And for the first time since I had been locked out, fear was no longer the strongest thing I felt. Somewhere, Daniel had left something Ethan desperately wanted hidden. The next morning, Denise drove me across town to see Jonathan Pierce. I had not spoken to Daniel's old attorney in years. After Daniel died, I signed whatever Jonathan placed in front of me, answered the questions he asked, and trusted that my husband had arranged everything properly. At the time, I had been grieving too deeply to care about legal language. I only cared that Daniel was gone. Jonathan's office sat on the second floor of an old brick building near downtown Columbus. The reception area smelled faintly of coffee and leather-bound books. I remembered coming there once with Daniel years before he died. He had worn his Navy suit and carried a folder under his arm. I had teased him for being so serious. Now I wished I had listened more carefully. Jonathan stepped out from behind his desk as soon as we entered. He was a tall man with silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the steady expression of someone who had spent a lifetime watching families fall apart over money. "Laura," he said quietly, "I'm so sorry you're dealing with this." I sat across from him, holding my purse in both hands. Denise sat beside me close enough that our shoulders touched. Jonathan asked me to tell him everything from the beginning. So I did. I told him about the dizziness at the grocery store, the hospital, Ethan arriving with flowers and promising to handle things at home, the changed locks, the boxes, my medication and identification locked inside, Ethan telling relatives that I was confused, Caleb's frightened phone call. Jonathan did not interrupt. He took notes in a yellow legal pad, his face becoming more serious with every sentence. When I finished, he removed his glasses and set them on his desk. "Did Ethan ask you to sign anything before your hospital stay?" he asked. "No." "Did he ever mention selling the house, refinancing it, or moving you somewhere else?" Melissa talked about senior apartments. "Ethan said the house was too much for me, but neither of them ever said they planned to force me out." Jonathan folded his hands together. "Laura, I need you to understand something. Your husband was very deliberate when he created the Hernandez family trust." My heart tightened. "Daniel told me there were protections," I said, "but he never explained them." "He wanted to explain them himself," Jonathan said. "He was worried that discussing certain provisions might cause conflict before it became necessary." Certain provisions? Jonathan stood and crossed to a wall of locked cabinets. He removed a key from his pocket, opened one drawer, and pulled out a thick gray file marked Hernandez Family Trust. For several seconds, I could only stare at it. It looked so ordinary. A stack of paper, a faded label. Nothing about it suggested it could decide whether I had a home or not. Jonathan placed the file on the desk and opened it carefully. "Daniel wanted you to have peace," he said, "but he also wanted you protected if someone tried to use pressure, fear, or legal confusion against you." He turned several pages, then rested his finger on a section marked Article 8, Paragraph 4. "The Protective Occupancy Clause." Denise leaned closer. I could barely breathe. Jonathan read the first part aloud. It stated that I, Laura Hernandez, had the exclusive right to live in the house for the remainder of my life. No beneficiary of the trust could interfere with my access to the home, remove my belongings, force me to relocate, sell the house, refinance the property, or claim control over my life without my willing and informed consent. I blinked at him. "So Ethan cannot make me leave?" "No," Jonathan said. "Not legally. Not because he thinks the house would be useful to him. Not because he tells people you are getting older. Not because he claims he knows what is best for you." The relief that moved through me was so sudden it almost hurt. For days I had felt as though the ground beneath me had disappeared. I had stood outside my own front door like a woman with nowhere to belong. But Daniel had not left me helpless. He had made sure of that. Jonathan continued. "The clause goes further than simply giving you lifetime occupancy. It specifically prohibits a beneficiary from locking you out, restricting your access, taking possession of your personal property, coercing you into signing documents, or using false claims of incapacity to control the home." I stared at the page. "That is exactly what Ethan has done." "It appears so," Jonathan said carefully. "And that is why we need to be precise." "What do you mean?" Jonathan closed the file halfway. "Changing the locks is serious. Withholding your medicine and personal documents is serious. Spreading claims that you are incompetent is serious. But to fully enforce the consequences under this clause, we need evidence showing that Ethan acted intentionally to remove you or gain control over the house." My stomach dropped again. "So he could still get away with it?" "No," Jonathan said firmly. "He will not get away with it." "But courts do not act on pain alone, Laura. They act on proof." Denise gave a sharp little laugh. "There is proof. The woman came home from a hospital and couldn't get through her own front door. And we will use that," Jonathan said. "Officer Bennett's report will help. Dr. Carter's written statement will help. Caleb's information may help, though we must be very careful not to put a child in the middle of this." He looked down at the clause again. "Your husband included something important here. If a beneficiary attempts to force you out, use fraud pressure you into surrendering the home, or falsely claim authority over your financial affairs, that beneficiary risks forfeiting their interest in the property." I frowned. Forfeiting? Yes. Losing it. Ethan would lose his inheritance. His interest in this house, yes. The room seemed to grow quieter. For all my fear and anger, I had not wanted to hurt Ethan. I wanted him to stop. I wanted my home back. I wanted him to remember that I was his mother. But Daniel had anticipated something I had refused to see. Jonathan gently turned another page and showed me a section written in bold legal type. If the clause was triggered and confirmed, the house would no longer remain subject to Ethan's future inheritance. It would become entirely mine. Not mine to occupy. Mine. I pressed my fingers to my lips. "Daniel did this," I whispered. "He did." "Why didn't he tell me?" Jonathan looked at me with sadness. "I believe he hoped you would never need to know." For a while, none of us spoke. Then Jonathan opened another folder inside the file. It contained notes from meetings Daniel had held with him years earlier. Jonathan read one line silently, then looked up at me. "There is something else you should know," he said. I nodded, though I was not sure I wanted to hear it. Daniel created this particular clause after an incident involving Ethan's business. The memory came back slowly. Years before Daniel got sick, Ethan had asked me to co-sign a loan for his renovation company. He had said it was only temporary. He said the bank needed one more signature because his credit was still being built. I had nearly signed. Daniel stopped me. At the time, I had been furious with him. I accused him of not believing in our son. Daniel had not argued. He had simply said, "Believing in Ethan and protecting you are not opposite things." I had not understood then. Now I did. Jonathan said Daniel was worried that financial pressure might make Ethan desperate. He did not want you to confuse guilt with responsibility. The tears came before I could stop them. I cried for Daniel. I cried because he had seen the danger. I cried because part of me still wished he had been wrong. Jonathan slid a box of tissues toward me. When I finally looked up, he said, "Laura, your son believes he has the upper hand because he has the house, the keys, and your belongings. But he missed the most important part of the trust." "What is that?" Jonathan tapped Article 8, Paragraph 4. "The moment he tried to push you out, he put his own future interest at risk." For the first time since Ethan changed the locks, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt steady. Daniel had left me a way forward. Now I only needed to find the proof that Ethan had been afraid of all along. Jonathan did not let me leave his office with only hope. Hope, he told me, was important, but hope would not open a locked door. Hope would not return my medicine, protect my identity, or stop Ethan from doing something worse while we waited. "We need evidence," he said. "Not assumptions, not even reasonable suspicions. We need a clear record showing what Ethan did, when he did it, and why." The word "why" stayed with me all the way back to Denise's house. Why had my son done this? I knew he had changed the locks. I knew he had lied about my health. I knew he had searched Daniel's office for the blue folder. But even then, a part of me still wanted to believe there was some explanation that would make it less ugly. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he had panicked. Maybe he truly believed he was helping. But every time I tried to offer him an excuse, I remembered the suitcase waiting inside my hallway. I remembered the way he told me to calm down while withholding my medication. And I remembered Caleb's frightened voice saying, "Dad said once she signs this is over." The next morning, Jonathan sent a request to Riverside Methodist for copies of my discharge records. Dr. Emily Carter's office also sent over a written statement confirming that I had been medically cleared to return home independently. When Jonathan read it to me over the phone, I felt something loosen inside my chest. The letter was short and clinical. It stated that I had been alert-oriented, able to understand medical instructions, and capable of managing my own decisions. It also made clear that Dr. Carter had never told Ethan to remove me from my home or take control of my personal affairs. It was not emotional. It did not call him cruel or dishonest. It simply stated the truth. And sometimes truth is more powerful when it does not need to shout. Jonathan also asked Officer Bennett for a copy of the incident report from the day I was locked out. The report noted that Ethan had admitted changing the locks and that I had reported being unable to retrieve essential belongings. Again, it was only paper. But it was paper that could not be dismissed as me being emotional. Meanwhile, Denise started remembering things. One afternoon, she was making grilled cheese sandwiches for us when she stopped in the middle of buttering the bread. "Laura?" She said, "The moving truck." I looked up from the kitchen table. "What moving truck?" "The one I saw near your house. It was the day after you went into the hospital." I stared at her. "You saw a moving truck?" Denise nodded slowly. I drove past on my way to the pharmacy. I remember thinking it was odd because Ethan's pickup was in the driveway too. There were two men carrying boxes out of the garage. My stomach tightened. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't know you were in the hospital then. I thought maybe you were cleaning out the garage or getting rid of old furniture. The thought of strangers carrying boxes from my house while I lay in a hospital bed made me feel sick. I asked Denise if she remembered the company name, but she did not. Still, she wrote down everything she could recall: the time of day, the white truck, the men in gray shirts, the boxes being moved. Jonathan said even details like that could matter. Then another piece of evidence came from someone I barely knew. My neighbor, Mrs. Grady, lived 3 houses down. She was in her late 70s and spent most afternoons sitting near her front window with a crossword puzzle in her lap. She saw more than people realized. I called her nervous that she would think I was asking her to take sides. Instead, she sounded angry before I had even finished explaining. "Laura, I knew something wasn't right," she said. "Your son was there late at night. I saw him and that wife of his carrying boxes through the side door. They were arguing. What did you hear? Not everything. But I heard him say something about a deadline. Then she told him, 'You said she would agree to this.'" My fingers tightened around the phone. "Did you see what they were carrying? Files? At least some of them. I saw folders under his arm." I thanked her and gave Jonathan her number. That night, I could not stop thinking about the folders. Daniel's office had always been private. Not secretive exactly, but organized. He kept financial records in labeled drawers. He had old tax documents, insurance policies, trust papers, and business files from his accounting career. If Ethan had carried folders out of the house, what had he taken, and what had he failed to find? The answer came from an old tablet I had forgotten I owned. It was sitting on a shelf in Denise's guest room, where I had placed the few things she managed to retrieve from her spare bedroom. Years earlier, Ethan had helped me set it up under our family account so he could troubleshoot it whenever I had trouble with email or video calls. I had barely used it lately, but when I opened the Messages app, I noticed something strange. Several conversations were syncing automatically. At first, I saw ordinary family messages: Melissa reminding Ethan to pick up Caleb, Ethan telling her he would be late, Caleb asking for a new baseball glove. Then I saw a thread between Ethan and someone named Travis. I did not recognize the name. My hands began to shake as I scrolled. The messages were about a contractor supplier, late invoices, missed payments, a lien threat, an account that had been frozen. There were photographs of overdue notices numbers that made my head spin and messages from Ethan begging for more time. One message read, "I can cover it once the house situation is handled." Another said, "I just need to get Mom to sign. After that, I can keep the business alive." I stared at those words until the letters blurred. The house situation. That was what I had become to him. Not his mother. Not the woman who had raised him, saved for his college tuition, sat through every school play, and stayed awake beside him when he had childhood fevers. A situation. I called Jonathan immediately. He told me not to delete or alter anything. He asked me to take photographs of the screen and bring the tablet to his office the next morning. When I arrived, he reviewed the messages one by one. He did not react dramatically, but the expression on his face changed. "This is important," he said. "Can it prove what he planned?" "It shows motive," Jonathan replied. "It shows financial pressure. It shows he viewed your house as a solution to his debt. And it suggests he was trying to obtain your signature on documents you had not been allowed to understand." He paused at one message from Ethan to Travis. "Mom doesn't need to understand the paperwork. She only needs to sign it." I felt cold all over. Jonathan read the sentence again, then looked at me. "Laura, this is no longer just a family argument over where you should live." I swallowed hard. "What is it then?" "It may be an attempt to exploit you financially." The words felt too large for the room. Financial exploitation. I'd heard stories about strangers scamming older people, fake calls from banks, phony repairmen, people pretending to be relatives in trouble. I never imagined the person who might try to deceive me would be my own son. Jonathan made copies of the messages and placed the tablet in a secure evidence envelope. He also asked me to make a list of every document I kept in Daniel's office. That list took hours. The deed records, property tax statements, insurance policies, trust correspondence, bank statements, old business files, the blue folder Daniel had once touched with his hand and told me to remember. I could not remember where that folder had gone. But I knew one thing now. Ethan was not trying to protect me from a future I could not manage. He was trying to use my fear, my hospital stay, and my love for him to save himself from the consequences of his own choices. And the more evidence we uncovered, the more I understood that he was not finished yet. Jonathan's letter arrived at Ethan's house on Thursday morning. It did not accuse him of crimes or use dramatic threats. It demanded that he return my medication identification, financial papers, personal belongings, and access to my home. It stated that I had the legal right to occupy the house and that further interference could endanger Ethan's future interest in the property. Jonathan sent it by certified mail and email. 23 minutes later, Ethan replied, "Come over tonight. We need to talk as a family." I read that message 3 times. It sounded harmless, but Ethan had learned to make ordinary words feel like a threat. Jonathan looked at my phone and said, "You do not go alone." So, at 6 that evening, I returned to my house with Jonathan and Denise. The sun was setting behind the maple tree. Everything looked familiar enough to hurt. Ethan opened the door but did not step aside. Melissa stood behind him, twisting her hands. Caleb was nowhere in sight. "Mom," Ethan said, "I didn't know you were bringing a lawyer. I didn't know I would need one," I answered. Jonathan introduced himself, handed Ethan a printed copy of the letter and said, "We are here to retrieve Mrs. Hernandez's essential property and discuss a lawful resolution." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You're making this sound like I kidnapped her belongings." "You withheld her medication after changing the locks," Jonathan said. "That is serious. I brought her what she needed." "No, you didn't," I said. His eyes met mine with cold irritation. "I was trying to protect you," he said, "by putting my suitcase in the hallway, by making sure you didn't come home and overdo it. I was medically cleared to come home. You had a heart issue, Mom. I had an irregular heartbeat. Dr. Carter said I could recover at home." He shook his head. "You always hear what you want to hear." For years, I had been the person Ethan called when life fell apart. Now he spoke to me as though I were an inconvenience. Jonathan stepped forward. "Mrs. Hernandez's records are clear. You should not misrepresent her medical condition." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You don't know my mother. I know the trust her husband created to protect her." At Daniel's name, Ethan looked away. Melissa lowered her eyes. Ethan finally moved aside and I entered the house. The new lock clicked behind us, a sound that made my stomach turn. The hallway smelled of dust and cardboard. My family photographs had been removed from the wall and leaned against the baseboard. Boxes crowded the stairs labeled kitchen, bedroom, and donate. I opened the nearest one. Inside were my sweaters, my blue cardigan, my church dress, and the quilt Daniel's mother made when we married. It was not temporary. No one packs a woman's whole life into boxes for a temporary arrangement. "You were going to donate my things," I asked. Ethan crossed his arms. "We were sorting. You have too much stuff." "This is not stuff." "It is about access," Jonathan said. "Mrs. Hernandez was denied access to her residence." Ethan laughed bitterly. "Fine, she can come back." "Is that what you want? She can stay here alone until something happens, then everyone can blame me for not doing enough." "Ethan," I said quietly, "why didn't you ask me?" His expression hardened. "Because you would have said no." "Yes," I said. "I would have." "Exactly." He said it as if my refusal justified every decision he made afterward. "You changed the locks while I was in the hospital," I said. "You kept my medicine. You told people I was confused. You searched your father's office. What did you expect me to do?" "Thank you. I was trying to find a solution." "To what?" "The house is too much for you," he said. "You don't need all this space. There are good senior communities near us. You would have help. Transportation. People around you. You wanted me in an apartment. I wanted you safe." "No," I said. "You wanted me gone." The room fell silent. For 1 second, I saw the little boy who used to race through this hallway. Then he was gone again. "Dad always made this place about you," he said. "Everything was what you wanted, what made you comfortable. Your father and I built this house together. And I grew up here," he snapped. "I was part of this family too." "You were. You are. But that does not make my home yours to take." His voice rose. "He left you everything. He always chose you." Jonathan opened the trust folder. "Your father created a future interest for you. That does not give you authority over your mother while she is alive, competent, and legally entitled to stay here." Ethan pulled a photocopy from the credenza. "I found Dad's old will. It says I inherit the house." Jonathan glanced at it. A prior will does not override a later trust, and inheritance begins after death, not when a beneficiary decides a living person is inconvenient. Melissa closed her eyes. I turned to her. "Did you know he planned to lock me out?" Ethan answered before she could. "Melissa doesn't need to be dragged into this." But she looked at me. "I knew he wanted to talk to you about moving," she whispered. "I knew he said there were papers. I thought it would be a few days. I thought you would stay with Denise while he got things organized." "A few days. I didn't know he took your medication," she said. "I didn't know he was telling everyone you were incapable. You watched them pack my things." "I know," she whispered. "I know." Ethan stepped forward. "She didn't understand the pressure we're under." "What pressure?" I asked. Jonathan answered. "We have reason to believe your business debts are connected to this attempt to control the property." Ethan's face hardened. "You've been going through my messages." "No," Jonathan said. "Your mother's sync device revealed messages relevant to her protection." Ethan looked at me like I had betrayed him. "You're spying on me now. I was trying to understand why my son threw me out of my own home." He moved closer. "You're letting them turn you against me." "No," I said. "You did that yourself." Then Ethan squared his shoulders. "Fine. You want to fight? I'll file for emergency guardianship. I'll tell the court you're being manipulated by Denise and this lawyer. I'll prove you can't make decisions for yourself." My heart pounded, but I did not look away. Jonathan's voice remained calm. "You may file any petition you believe you can support. But false claims of incapacity after a documented lockout and attempted control of her property may have serious consequences." I looked at the boxes by the stairs. Then I faced my son. "You can file whatever you want," I said, "but I will not disappear to make your life easier." For the first time, Ethan seemed to understand that I was no longer asking for my home back. I was preparing to fight for it. Ethan filed for emergency guardianship 3 days later. Jonathan called me early that morning. "Laura," he said, "we received notice from the probate court. Ethan is asking a judge to appoint him as your emergency guardian." For a few seconds I could not speak. The word guardian sounded gentle, protective, responsible. But in Ethan's hands, it meant control. It meant he could claim the right to decide where I lived, who handled my money, what papers I signed, and whether I could return to my own home. He was taking the lie he had built around me and placing it in front of a judge. "What did he say about me?" I asked. Jonathan's pause told me enough. "He claims you have shown sudden confusion, poor judgment, memory loss, and an inability to manage your medical needs." I sat at Denise's kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. "He changed the locks," I whispered. "He took my medication, and now he is saying I can't manage my own life." "I know," Jonathan said. "That is why we are responding immediately." The hearing was scheduled for the following afternoon. I did not sleep much that night. I kept wondering what Ethan would say. Would he describe me as forgetful, difficult, lonely? Would he bring up every time I misplaced my glasses or forgot to return a phone call? Getting older makes people nervous. They see gray hair, slower steps, a hospital bracelet, and suddenly they begin looking for proof that you are no longer yourself. But I was still myself. I remembered every room in my house. I remembered the day Daniel and I bought it. I remembered raising Ethan there. I remembered the exact expression on my son's face when he told me I could not come inside. The next morning, Jonathan met Denise and me outside the courthouse. He carried a thick leather briefcase. Inside were Dr. Carter's statement hospital records, Officer Bennett's incident report, photographs of my locked door, copies of Ethan's messages about the house, and the trust documents. "You do not need to prove you are perfect," Jonathan told me before we walked in. "You only need to show that you remain capable of making your own decisions." "I am capable," I said. "I know." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. It had pale walls, wooden benches, and a large seal behind the judge's seat. Everything felt too quiet. Ethan sat at one table with a lawyer I had never seen before. Melissa sat beside him, her face tense. Caleb was not there. When Ethan looked at me, I searched for some sign that he regretted dragging me into court. I found none. Judge Harriet Monroe entered a few minutes later. She was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled neatly back and a calm expression that made the whole room sit straighter. The clerk called the case. Then Ethan's attorney stood. He spoke smoothly about concern, about safety, about an elderly woman living alone after a heart-related hospital visit, about concerning behavior and possible cognitive decline. Every word sounded clean and respectful. That was what made it so cruel. He said I had become forgetful. He said I was vulnerable to manipulation. He said Ethan had acted out of love and responsibility when he changed the locks. I looked at my son. He kept his eyes on the table. Then his attorney said something that made my stomach turn. "Mr. Hernandez believes his mother is being influenced by friends and legal professionals who do not understand her daily condition." Denise shifted beside me. Jonathan placed a steady hand on my arm. When it was his turn, he stood slowly. "Your Honor." He said this petition is not about Mrs. Hernandez's safety. It is about access to her home and assets. He presented Dr. Carter's medical statement first. The judge read it carefully. Dr. Carter states that Mrs. Hernandez was alert-oriented, medically stable, and capable of returning home independently. Judge Monroe said, "Mr. Hernandez, did any medical provider instruct you to remove your mother from her house?" Ethan's attorney hesitated. "No, Your Honor. But Mr. Hernandez had concerns based on her recent condition." Judge Monroe looked directly at Ethan. "Concerns are not the same as authority." The room went still. Jonathan then presented the police report. Judge Monroe read the section describing how I had been locked out after my hospital discharge and unable to access my medication or identification. Her expression changed. "Mr. Hernandez," she said, "did you change the locks while your mother was hospitalized?" Ethan leaned toward his attorney, then answered quietly, "Yes. Did you withhold her medication? I was going to bring it to her." "That was not my question." His face tightened. "I did not mean to withhold it. Things were chaotic." Judge Monroe looked down at the report again. "Your mother had just been discharged from the hospital. You prevented her from entering her home and did not immediately provide medication or personal documents. Yet you are asking this court to believe you acted solely in her best interest." Ethan's attorney stood again, trying to redirect the conversation. "Your Honor, Mr. Hernandez was overwhelmed. He believed his mother might need more supervision." Jonathan opened the trust documents. Mrs. Hernandez's late husband anticipated precisely this kind of pressure, he said. "The trust grants her exclusive lifetime occupancy of the house and prohibits any beneficiary from restricting her access, coercing her into relocation, or using claims of incapacity to control the property." Judge Monroe took the document. As she read, I saw Ethan's shoulders stiffen. Then Jonathan introduced the messages from the sync tablet. He did not read every message aloud. He did not need to. He showed the one where Ethan told Travis that he needed to get Mom to sign so he could save his business. He showed the message where Ethan wrote that I did not need to understand the paperwork, only sign it. The judge looked at Ethan for a long moment. "Mr. Hernandez," she said, "what paperwork were you planning for your mother to sign?" Ethan swallowed. "I was exploring options." "What options?" "I thought maybe she could refinance the house. Or sell it. There are ways to help everyone." Without her understanding the documents, that message was taken out of context. "Then explain the context." Ethan looked at his attorney. His attorney said nothing. For the first time, I saw real fear in my son's face. Then Melissa stood. Her lawyer had not been involved. She was not required to speak. But she rose slowly from her chair and asked the judge if she could say something. Judge Monroe nodded. Melissa's hands were shaking. "I thought he was trying to get Laura to consider moving," she said. "I thought he wanted a few days to organize things." Ethan turned sharply toward her. "Melissa." But she kept speaking. "I didn't know he planned to change the locks before she came home. I didn't know he had been talking about guardianship. And I didn't know he had already contacted people about the house." Jonathan asked, "Do you have anything that supports that?" Melissa reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "There's a screenshot," she said. "I found it after he took Caleb's tablet." She handed the phone to Jonathan. The screenshot showed a conversation between Ethan and Travis from 2 days before I went to the hospital. Ethan had written, "Once she's out, I can move fast. Hospital stay might be the opening I need." The courtroom became silent in a way I had never heard before. Not angry silence. Sickened silence. Judge Monroe read the message once, then again. Ethan's attorney asked for a private discussion. The judge allowed it for a few minutes. While they whispered, I stared at the back of Ethan's head. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to feel nothing. Instead, I felt grief, not for the house, for the son I thought I knew. When the hearing resumed, Judge Monroe spoke clearly. "The petition for emergency guardianship is denied." My breath caught. She continued. "Mrs. Hernandez has presented substantial evidence that she remains competent, that her medical condition was misrepresented, and that the petitioner may have acted with financial motives inconsistent with her welfare. She ordered Ethan not to interfere with my access to my home or property. She also warned him that further attempts to control my financial affairs without my consent could lead to serious legal consequences." Then she looked directly at me. "Mrs. Hernandez, you have the right to make your own decisions." I nodded, but tears filled my eyes. I had known it all along. Still hearing it spoken in that courtroom felt like getting a piece of myself back. As we left, Jonathan leaned close and said, "This is not over." I looked back once. Ethan was sitting alone at the table, staring at the papers in front of him. And for the first time, he looked less like a man in control. He looked like a man realizing the truth was finally catching up with him. 2 days after the guardianship hearing, I received a call from a number I did not recognize. At first, I almost ignored it. I had spent the past week answering calls from relatives, lawyers' doctors' offices, and people who suddenly wanted to know whether Ethan had really locked me out. I was exhausted by the sound of my phone. Every ring felt like another demand for me to explain something I had never asked to survive. But something made me answer. "Mrs. Hernandez," a woman asked. Her voice was calm and professional. "My name is Amanda Cole. I'm calling from the Fraud and Compliance Department at First Community Bank. Is this a safe time to speak?" My stomach tightened. "Yes," I said. "What is this about?" There is an application associated with your name and the property on Maplewood Drive. Before we proceed, I need to verify whether you authorized it. For a moment, I could not understand what she meant. What application? A home equity loan application, she said. The application lists you as the primary property owner and includes your signature. My fingers went numb around the phone. I did not apply for a loan. Amanda was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Hernandez, are you certain? Yes, I said. I have not signed anything. I have not authorized anyone to borrow money against my house. She asked me several questions. Had I met with a loan officer? Had I spoken to anyone about refinancing? Had I asked my son, Ethan Hernandez, to act on my behalf? No, I said again and again. No, no, no. Then Amanda told me something that made my heart pound. The application claimed I had moved out of my home voluntarily after a medical incident. It stated that my son was helping me manage the property while I transitioned to assisted living. It also included a note saying Ethan had been given permission to oversee the loan process because I was too distressed to deal with paperwork. I felt sick. He had not only locked me out, he had built an entire false life around me. Can you send me copies? I asked. We cannot release everything by email yet, Amanda said, but I can tell you the application has been frozen. Our system flagged several inconsistencies. What inconsistencies? The signature does not match prior records. The contact information was changed recently, and the title documents raised concerns because your trust interest was not disclosed correctly. I closed my eyes. Daniel's trust. The clause Ethan had not found. Amanda continued, I also noticed a court record connected to an emergency guardianship petition. That raised additional questions. Given what you have told me, I'm referring this matter for a formal fraud review. I thanked her, but my voice barely sounded like my own. After I hung up, I sat at Denise's kitchen table for a long time without moving. Denise walked in carrying a basket of laundry and took one look at my face. What happened? I told her. She put the basket down so quickly that one of the towels fell onto the floor. He forged your signature, I don't know for certain, I said. But I never signed anything. You know what that means, Laura. Yes, I whispered. It means he was never planning to ask. Jonathan came over within the hour. I gave him Amanda's contact information, and he immediately called Officer Ryan Bennett. By the next morning, the three of us were seated in a small conference room at the bank. Amanda Cole was younger than I expected, perhaps in her early 50s, with dark hair pulled into a neat bun and a stack of files arranged perfectly in front of her. She was kind, but there was no softness in the way she handled the documents. She placed the loan application on the table. There it was. My name, my address, my date of birth, and a signature that looked like mine only from far away. I stared at it until my eyes burned. This isn't my handwriting, I said. Amanda nodded. We suspected that. The proposed loan amount was large enough to make my chest tighten. It would have paid Ethan's supplier debts, his overdue contractor bills, and whatever else he had hidden from me. In exchange, my home would have been placed at risk. The home Daniel and I had spent decades paying for. The home Ethan had tried to turn into a rescue boat for a business he was drowning. Officer Bennett sat beside Jonathan, reading the timeline carefully. According to the application, he said, When was this submitted? Amanda pointed to the date. It was the day after I had been admitted to the hospital. The day Ethan told me he would handle everything. I looked at Jonathan. He was planning it before I came home. Yes, he said quietly. Amanda showed us another page. The application included a witness signature. My breath caught when I saw the name, Melissa Hernandez. For a moment, nobody spoke. Jonathan asked, Was Mrs. Hernandez present when this document was signed? Amanda shook her head. The witness certification claims she was. Officer Bennett wrote something in his notebook. Then he looked at me gently. Mrs. Hernandez, we may need to speak with Melissa. I nodded, though my heart hurt. Melissa had already admitted that she knew more than she first said. But seeing her name on that document felt different. It meant she had stood close enough to the lie to give it a shape. That evening, Melissa came to Denise's house alone. She stood at the front door with red eyes and a winter coat pulled tightly around her body. She looked less like the woman who had stood behind Ethan in my hallway, and more like someone who had finally realized the floor beneath her was gone. Denise let her in, but she did not offer her tea. Melissa sat across from me in the living room. For several minutes, she said nothing. Finally, she reached into her purse and placed a folded piece of paper on the coffee table. I printed the application from Ethan's laptop, she said. I looked at it, but did not touch it. Why are you here? I asked. Her lips trembled. Because I need to tell the truth. I waited. Ethan asked me to witness something, she said. He told me it was paperwork, saying you agreed to let him help with the house. He said you were overwhelmed after the hospital and that he had talked to you already. Did you see me sign it? No. Did you ask to speak to me? Melissa lowered her head. No. The pain of that answer was sharp, but it was clean. There was no excuse inside it. He said you would understand later, she whispered. He said it was temporary. He said it would keep the business alive until things settled down. And you believed him? At first, she said. Then I saw the moving boxes. I heard him talk about guardianship. I saw Caleb getting scared. And after court, I found more messages. She handed Jonathan a small flash drive. I copied them before he could delete anything she said. There are messages with a mortgage broker. There are messages about needing your signature. He kept saying the hospital made everything easier. My throat tightened. The hospital made everything easier. Not my health, not my recovery, my vulnerability. Officer Bennett returned the next day to take Melissa's statement. She admitted that she had signed as a witness without seeing me sign anything. She admitted that Ethan told her I would be moved out of the house quickly. She admitted that she knew his business was close to collapse. But she also said something that stayed with me. I thought I was helping my husband survive, she cried. I didn't understand that he was asking me to help him destroy his mother. Jonathan did not comfort her. Neither did I. Some apologies arrive too late to prevent harm. That does not mean they are meaningless, but they do not erase the damage already done. The bank froze the loan application completely. Amanda informed us that the file had been escalated for investigation. Officer Bennett said the forged signature false statements and attempted financial control would all be reviewed. And Jonathan opened the trust again. He turned to Article 8, Paragraph 4. This is exactly what Daniel feared, he said. The lockout was one violation. The false incapacity claims were another. But this attempted loan may be the clearest proof yet that Ethan intended to use pressure and deception to control the home. I stared at the page. My husband had created that clause years before Ethan ever changed the locks. He had seen the danger long before I did. That realization hurt, but it also gave me strength. Ethan thought he could use my age, my illness, and my love for him to make me surrender. He thought he could turn me into a signature on a page. But now the bank knew, the police knew, the court knew, and soon everyone in our family would have to face the truth. My son had not tried to protect me. He had tried to take everything Daniel and I built. The truth did not arrive all at once. A locked door, a medicine bottle kept from me, a court petition built on lies, a loan application bearing a signature I had never written. After the bank froze Ethan's application, the damage began to spread into the rest of his life. Jonathan called me on a gray Monday morning. First Community has confirmed that the loan cannot move forward, he said. They have placed an internal hold on the file. And Ethan, his attorney, contacted me. He wants to discuss settlement. He will return some belongings and give you access to the house if you agree not to pursue enforcement of the trust. I stared at the rain sliding down Denise's windows. For weeks, Ethan had spoken as though I was the problem he needed to solve. Now he wanted me to accept a key to my own home as though it were a gift. No, I said. For years, I had confused forgiveness with surrender. I thought being a good mother meant leaving the door open for every excuse, apology, and promise that things would be different. But forgiveness and trust were not the same thing. I might someday forgive Ethan for being desperate. I might even forgive him for becoming afraid. But I could not trust him with my home, my money, or my future while he was still trying to take them. That evening, Melissa came to Denise's house without calling first. Denise opened the front door and found her standing in the cold with Caleb beside her. He wore his school backpack and clutched a gray duffel bag with both hands. The sight of him stopped my heart. "Grandma," he said. I crossed the room and pulled him into my arms. He held on tightly, too tightly for an 11-year-old boy who should have been worrying about homework and baseball practice. Melissa stood in the doorway with red eyes. "I'm sorry to come without warning," she said. "I didn't know where else to go." Denise led them inside. Caleb sat beside me on the couch while Melissa stood near the fireplace, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. "What happened?" I asked. She looked at Caleb. "Why don't you sit with Grandma in the kitchen? Denise has hot chocolate." He did not want to leave, but he went after. I promised I would be right there. The moment he was out of earshot, Melissa's shoulders collapsed. "Ethan knows the loan was frozen," she said. "The bank called him this afternoon." I waited. He came home furious. Not sad, not scared. Furious. He said everyone had turned against him. He said you were letting Jonathan destroy him. He said I betrayed him by speaking in court. "Did he threaten you?" "No," she said quickly. "Not directly." But he was yelling. Caleb was upstairs and he could hear every word. I remembered Ethan as a boy becoming quiet whenever he sensed anger in a room. I had spent years trying to make our home feel safe for him. Now, he was making his own son afraid to come downstairs. Melissa wiped her cheeks. "I told him I couldn't keep doing this. I told him the house was never going to save him because it was never his to use. And what did he say? She stared at the floor. He said, "That house is the only thing standing between us and losing everything." The words settled heavily between us. Not my mother's home, not Daniel and Laura's life. The only thing standing between us and losing everything. To Ethan, the house had become a life raft. He was so afraid of sinking that he had convinced himself he was entitled to climb onto anything that could keep him afloat, even if it meant pushing me under. Melissa pulled an envelope from her purse and placed it on the coffee table. "I found this in his desk," she said. Inside was a locksmith invoice. I read the date twice. It was dated 2 days before I went to the hospital. The invoice listed a new deadbolt rekeying services and an appointment window for the morning I had been admitted. For several seconds, I could not understand what I was seeing. Ethan had not changed the locks because I came home from the hospital. He had arranged to change them before I ever got sick. My hospital stay had not created his plan. It had simply given him the excuse he needed. I looked at Melissa. "Did you know about this?" "No," she whispered. "I swear I didn't. I found it tonight after he blamed the hospital again. I knew something was wrong. I believed she had not known everything, but I also knew she had seen enough to stop him sooner." There was a difference between innocence and regret. Melissa sat down slowly. "I should have asked more questions," she said. "I should have called you. I should have told him no." "Yes," I said. She flinched, but I could not soften the truth for her. "He made the choices," I continued. "But you were there when some of them happened. You cannot undo that by crying now." "I know. I'm not saying this to punish you. I'm saying it because Caleb needs one adult who will not pretend things are fine when they are not." At the sound of his name, she covered her face. "I took him with me because I couldn't let him hear another fight," she said. "I told Ethan we were staying somewhere else tonight. We're an empty apartment over my friend's garage. Just for a few days. It was not a permanent plan, but it was a beginning." Caleb came back into the living room carrying hot chocolate. A little foam mustache sat above his lip, and for the first time that evening, he smiled. "Mom said I can stay with you for dinner," he said. "You can," I told him. "You can stay as long as you need." He climbed onto the couch beside me and rested his head against my shoulder. Later, after Melissa and Caleb left for the apartment, I sat alone with a photograph of the invoice on my phone. The date kept staring back at me. 2 days before the hospital. 2 days before my son stood beside my bed and held my hand. 2 days before he told me not to worry because he would handle everything. The betrayal was no longer a sudden act of panic. It had been planned. The next morning, Jonathan reviewed the invoice and placed it with the rest of our evidence. "It shows planning," he said. "It directly contradicts his claim that your medical event caused him to act." For the first time, I understood that protecting myself was not the same as abandoning my son. It was refusing to let him abandon his conscience and take me down with him. Jonathan filed the petition the following week. He called it an action to enforce the protective occupancy clause in Daniel's trust. To me, it felt simpler than that. It was the moment I stopped asking my son to give back what he had taken. We were asking the court to recognize that he had never had the right to take it in the first place. For days before the filing, Jonathan and his paralegal organized every piece of evidence into labeled folders. My hospital discharge records, Dr. Carter's statement, Officer Bennett's report, the photographs of my locked front door, the moving truck observations from Denise and Mrs. Grady, the locksmith invoice dated before I ever went to the hospital. Then there were the messages. Ethan's messages about my house being the solution to his business debt. His message telling Travis that I did not need to understand the paperwork, only sign it. The message saying my hospital stay might be the opening he needed. Every sentence was like looking at a different version of my son. Not the little boy who once built blanket forts in my living room. Not the young man who drove Daniel to chemotherapy appointments. This was a man who had looked at my weakest moment and tried to turn it into an advantage. Jonathan sat across from me at his office desk reviewing the petition one last time. "The court does not need to decide every issue today," he said. "But it needs to see that Ethan's conduct created an immediate threat to your rights under the trust. What happens if the judge agrees? First, the court can stop him from taking further action involving the house. Then we can seek enforcement of the forfeiture provision." The word forfeiture still made my stomach tighten. Even after everything Ethan had done, I did not wake up hoping to take something from him. I was not trying to punish him because I was angry. I was trying to make sure he could never do this to me again. Jonathan seemed to understand that. "Laura," he said gently, "the clause was not written to punish Ethan for disappointing you. It was written to protect you if he tried to use control, deception, or pressure against you." I looked at the stack of papers between us. "And he did." "Yes," Jonathan said. "He did." The petition was filed that afternoon. Ethan responded the next morning. He did not call me directly. His attorney sent Jonathan a settlement offer. Ethan would return every key. He would leave the house. He would hand over my remaining belongings and agree not to interfere with my finances. In return, I would agree to dismiss the petition and promise not to enforce the clause that could take away his future interest in the home. Jonathan read the offer to me in his office. For a moment, I said nothing. Part of me wanted to accept. I wanted the nightmare to end. I wanted my keys back. I wanted to walk through my front door without another hearing, another report, another person looking at my family's pain as evidence. Then I thought of the locksmith invoice. He had planned to lock me out before I became ill. I thought of the forged signature. He had planned to borrow against my home without my knowledge. I thought of Caleb whispering into a borrowed phone because he was afraid his father would hear him. No, I said. Jonathan looked at me carefully. You understand that refusing means this may continue longer. I know. It may permanently change your relationship with Ethan. That hurt more than anything else, but I nodded. He changed our relationship when he decided I was something he could use, I said. I cannot agree to pretend it was only a misunderstanding. Jonathan placed the settlement offer in a folder. Then we moved forward. The hearing took place 10 days later. This time I was not as afraid when I entered the courthouse. I was still nervous. My hands still trembled when I held my purse, but fear no longer made me feel small. Fear had taught me to pay attention. Denise came with me. So did Melissa, though she sat quietly in the back of the courtroom with Caleb beside her. She had not asked me for forgiveness again. She had begun to understand that some things had to be proven through action, not tears. Ethan sat with his attorney at the opposite table. He looked tired. His suit jacket was wrinkled. There were dark circles beneath his eyes. For one painful second, I saw the exhausted little boy he had once been after a fever. Then he looked at me, and I remembered why we were there. Judge Monroe entered the courtroom and reviewed the filing. Jonathan began with the simplest truth. Mrs. Hernandez was hospitalized briefly for a manageable heart rhythm condition, he said. During her hospitalization, her son arranged for locks to be changed at her home. When she was discharged, she was denied access to the residence, her medication identification, personal documents, and personal belongings. He presented the discharge records. Then he presented Dr. Carter's written statement. Judge Monroe read it without interruption. Mrs. Hernandez was medically cleared to return home independently, she said. There was no recommendation that she be removed from her residence. No, Your Honor, Jonathan said. Ethan's attorney stood and argued that Ethan had simply overreacted out of concern. He made a poor decision, the attorney said, but a poor decision made under stress should not result in the permanent loss of his future interest in the property. Jonathan's expression did not change. Your Honor, this was not one poor decision. He placed the locksmith invoice before the judge. The courtroom became quiet as she studied the date. This invoice predates Mrs. Hernandez's hospital admission, Judge Monroe said. Yes, Jonathan replied. Mr. Hernandez arranged to change the locks before the alleged emergency that he later used to justify his actions. Ethan looked down at the table. Jonathan then called Officer Bennett to explain his report. The officer described arriving after I was locked out, noting that I could not access medication or identification and speaking with Ethan about returning essential items. Mrs. Grady's written statement was submitted next. She confirmed that she had seen boxes and folders being moved from my house while I was hospitalized. Denise's statement confirmed that she had seen a moving truck near the property during the same period. Then Amanda Cole from First Community Bank appeared by video conference. She explained the frozen home equity loan application. She stated that the application used my name, listed false information about me moving into assisted living, and contained a signature inconsistent with bank records. Did Mrs. Hernandez authorize the application? Judge Monroe asked. Not according to her direct statement, Amanda replied. And our review identified significant inconsistencies. Jonathan displayed the screenshot of Ethan's message. Mom doesn't need to understand the paperwork. She only needs to sign it. The judge read it silently. Ethan's attorney objected, but the objection did not erase the message from the room. Finally, Jonathan opened the trust. He read Article 8, Paragraph 4 into the record. It said that no beneficiary could restrict my access to the home, remove my belongings, use coercion or false claims of incapacity, or attempt to obtain control of the property through deception. It also stated that such conduct could trigger forfeiture of that beneficiary's interest in the house. Judge Monroe looked directly at Ethan. Mr. Hernandez, do you dispute that you changed the locks? No, he said quietly. Do you dispute that you pursued a loan against the property without your mother's informed consent? His attorney leaned toward him. Ethan's hands curled into fists. I was trying to save my family, he said. Judge Monroe's voice remained calm. Your mother is your family. The words landed harder than yelling ever could. Ethan's eyes filled for 1 second, but he looked away. After a brief recess, Judge Monroe returned with her decision. She said the evidence showed a pattern of planned interference with my right to occupy my home. She found that Ethan's conduct created a serious risk to my property finances and personal independence. Then, she ordered that Ethan's beneficial interest in the house be suspended pending final enforcement of the clause. He could not sell, borrow against transfer, or claim any authority over the home. The house was protected. I was protected. As we left the courtroom, Ethan stood in the hallway alone. He looked at me and said, "Mom, I can fix this." I held his gaze. "You had many chances to stop," I said softly. "Fixing it begins with telling the truth." Then I walked away. For the first time, I did not look back. 3 days after the court suspended Ethan's interest in the house, Jonathan called me just after breakfast. "Laura, he said I found something Daniel left for you." I stood in Denise's kitchen with one hand on the counter, the blue folder. "Yes." Daniel placed it in a sealed personal effects box in my archive room after our final meeting. It was marked for release only if you ever faced pressure involving the house. For weeks, that folder had felt like a ghost in our lives. Ethan had searched Daniel's office for it. Caleb had heard him asking about it. Now, after 6 years, Daniel had found a way to put a hand between me and danger. Jonathan asked me to come to his office that afternoon. Denise drove me through light snow over Columbus. A blue folder rested in the center of the conference table. It was not fancy. The corners were softened with age. Daniel's handwriting crossed the tab in dark blue ink. "Laura, only if you need this." My breath caught. I had seen that handwriting on grocery lists, birthday cards, tax documents, and notes he left on the refrigerator before work. "Buy milk. Call Ethan. I love you." For years after Daniel died, I could not look at his handwriting without crying. That day, I touched the edge of the folder with 2 fingers. Jonathan sat across from me. "Before you open it," he said, "there are 2 documents inside. One is a personal letter from Daniel. The other is an intent statement he signed when he created the protective occupancy clause." What is an intent statement? It explains why he included the clause and what he wanted to happen if someone tried to force you from the home or control it through deception. I looked at him. He expected this. He feared it was possible, Jonathan said. "That is not the same thing as expecting it." I opened the folder. The first page was a letter in Daniel's handwriting. My hands trembled so much that Denise placed her hand over mine. I read the first line once, then again. "My dear Laura, if you are reading this, then someone has made you feel as if you must give up what is yours in order to keep peace in the family." The room around me disappeared. I could hear Daniel's voice in every word, gentle, careful, and completely certain. He wrote that he knew I would always be tempted to make things easier for the people I loved. I would excuse harsh words, accept unfair requests, and tell myself that helping family mattered more than protecting myself. He wrote that this was one of the things he loved most about me. Then he wrote that it was also what he worried someone might use against me. "Laura, you have spent your life taking care of others. Please do not let anyone teach you that being a good mother means surrendering your safety, your home, or your voice." The tears came before I reached the bottom of the page. I had spent weeks telling myself that standing up to Ethan made me cold. I had wondered whether I should forgive him simply because he was my son. Daniel had known exactly where my heart would go first. It would go to Ethan, even if Ethan had stopped seeing me as his mother. The letter then described the day Ethan asked me to co-sign a business loan. His renovation company was new, and his confidence was bigger than his savings. He came to dinner with paperwork in a manila envelope. He said the bank only needed one more signature. He said I would not be responsible for anything. Daniel took the papers into his office, read every line, and said no. Ethan was furious. He accused Daniel of never believing in him and accused me of letting my husband make every decision. For days afterward, I had felt torn in half. Daniel had never told me what happened after Ethan left, but the letter did. Ethan called him the following morning and said that one day the house would come to him anyway. He said Daniel was protecting something Ethan already considered part of his future. Daniel wrote that the words frightened him, not because he believed Ethan was evil, but because he heard entitlement where there should have been gratitude. The second document was typed, signed by Daniel, and witnessed by Jonathan. It stated that Daniel created Article 8, Paragraph 4 to ensure I could remain in the home without pressure from any beneficiary. It said that if Ethan or anyone else used deception, false incapacity, coercion, or financial manipulation to force me out or seize control, Daniel wanted the clause enforced fully. There was one sentence Jonathan read aloud. "If Laura's right to live safely and independently in the home is threatened by a beneficiary, I intend for the property to transfer entirely to Laura free from that beneficiary's interest." I looked up at Jonathan. Entirely? Yes, he said. Daniel made his intention clear. The clause was not meant to be symbolic. He wanted the court to have authority to place the house entirely in your name if it was triggered. For a long time, I could not speak. The house had always been ours, Daniel's and mine. Later, after he died, it became the place where I felt closest to him. But now I understood something different. Daniel had not left me protection because he thought I was helpless without him. He left it because he knew I was strong enough to use it. My phone rang while we were still in Jonathan's office. Ethan's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it until it nearly stopped ringing. Then I answered. "Mom," he said. His voice was rough. "I heard you found something Dad left." "Yes," I said. There was silence. Then he said, "He always hated me." The words stunned me. "No," I replied. "Your father loved you. You don't know that. I do know it, and that is why this hurts so much. I made mistakes. You made plans, Ethan. I was desperate. So you decided I should pay for it. I thought I could fix it. You did not try to fix it. You tried to take control." His voice sharpened. "You're going to let Dad take everything from me, even after he's dead." I looked at the blue folder on the table. "No," I said quietly. "Your father gave me a way to protect myself. What happens next depends on what you chose to do." He hung up. I sat there with the phone in my hand, grieving the conversation I wished we could have had. Then, Jonathan slid Daniel's letter back across the table. "Laura, he said this document will support the final enforcement hearing." I looked at Daniel's name one last time. For years, I thought his greatest gift to me was our home. But it was not. His greatest gift was reminding me that love should never require me to disappear. The final hearing took place on a clear Monday morning in early spring. The snow had melted from the sidewalks and small green buds had appeared on the trees outside the courthouse. I noticed them as Denise and I walked toward the entrance. Months earlier, I had stood outside my own locked front door and felt as though my life had ended in one cold afternoon. Now the world was beginning again. Jonathan met us inside with the blue folder under his arm. I knew every page by heart. Daniel's letter, his intent statement, the protective occupancy clause, and all the proof Ethan had given us without realizing it. Ethan sat at the other table with his attorney. His hair was uncombed and the hard confidence he carried when he changed the locks was gone. But I did not mistake exhaustion for accountability. A person can be sorry that consequences arrived without being sorry for the harm they caused. Judge Monroe reviewed the record in silence. Then, Jonathan stood. "Your Honor," he said, "the evidence shows a deliberate pattern. Mr. Hernandez arranged a locksmith before his mother's hospitalization. He locked her out after discharge, withheld essential belongings, falsely suggested incapacity, attempted to obtain financial control, and pursued a loan secured by the home without her informed consent." The judge nodded slowly. Jonathan placed Daniel's intent statement before her. "This document explains the trust creator's purpose. Daniel Hernandez intended for Laura Hernandez to retain full ownership if a beneficiary used pressure or deception to interfere with her right to live safely in the home." Ethan's attorney argued that the forfeiture would be excessive. Mr. Hernandez suffered severe business losses, he said. He made poor decisions under extraordinary stress, but he did not intend to harm his mother. I looked at Ethan. He still did not meet my eyes. Judge Monroe folded her hands. "Stress does not authorize a son to seize control of his mother's home," she said. "An intent is shown not only by words, but by planning." She looked at the locksmith invoice, the loan application, and the messages. "Here we have a plan made before the hospitalization. We have false statements made after it. And we have financial documents that sought to use Mrs. Hernandez's property for Mr. Hernandez's benefit." Then she turned to me. "Mrs. Hernandez, is there anything you wish to say before I issue my decision? I had prepared a speech the night before. I wanted to explain every night I spent awake at Denise's house, every moment I wondered whether I was a bad mother for fighting back. But when I stood, I did not need it. I loved my son before he was born, I said. I will always love the boy I raised in that house, but I cannot keep rescuing the man he decided to become at my expense." My voice shook, but I continued. "I did not come here to punish him. I came here because I deserve to be safe in my own home. I deserve to make my own decisions. And I deserve to be treated as a person, not as a problem someone can solve with a lock and a piece of paper." Judge Monroe held my gaze. Then she gave her ruling. She found that Ethan had violated the protective occupancy clause. His conduct was intentional, planned, and connected to an attempt to control the house and use its value to address his financial problems. The forfeiture provision would be enforced. Ethan's future interest in the property was terminated. The trust would transfer full title of the home to me, not merely the right to live there. The house was mine. For a second, I could not move. Jonathan touched my arm. Denise covered her mouth with both hands. Judge Monroe continued with the practical terms. Ethan was required to surrender every key garage remote and copy of any access code. He could not enter the property without my written permission. He could not remove anything, sell anything, borrow against anything, or represent himself as having authority over the house. The bank's review would continue separately. The loan application remained withdrawn and frozen. No attempt to revive it could involve my name or property. Then the judge addressed Ethan. Mr. Hernandez, this court is not deciding whether you are beyond redemption. It is deciding whether your mother is entitled to protection. She is. Ethan's face crumpled for the first time. When the hearing ended, he remained seated while everyone else stood. I expected to feel triumph. Instead, I felt relief. Outside the courthouse, Jonathan handed me a new set of documents. My name appeared where it had always belonged now, without uncertainty. Laura Hernandez, sole owner. I held the papers against my chest. A few minutes later, Ethan came out with his attorney. He stopped several feet away from me. "I'm sorry," he said. For one fragile second, the mother in me wanted to cross the distance. I wanted to ask what had happened to the child who used to sleep with a flashlight under his pillow. But I had learned that love without boundaries was not mercy. It was permission. "You are sorry now because you lost," I said. "I hope someday you become sorry because you understand what you did." He looked down. I didn't know what else to do. You could have told the truth. You could have asked for help. You could have faced your debts without trying to make me pay for them. His eyes filled with tears. "Can I come home?" The question broke something open inside me, but I shook my head. "Not now. Not until I see real change. You do not get access to me, Caleb, or this house, just because you say the word sorry." He nodded once, then walked away. Melissa and Caleb had moved into a small rental near his school. It was not fancy, but when I visited, it was clean, warm, and calm. Caleb showed me the corner of his new bedroom where he had taped up baseball cards and a drawing of our maple tree. "Dad says he's getting help," he told me quietly. "I hope he is," I said. "Will he ever come to your house again?" I thought before I answered. "Maybe one day, but only when he understands that family is not something you own." Caleb nodded as if he understood more than any child should have to. That afternoon, I returned to my house with Jonathan and a locksmith of my own. We changed every lock again, this time for me. I stood on the porch as the new keys were placed in my hand. The metal was cool against my palm. When I opened the front door, I did not need anyone's permission. I stepped inside, set my purse on the hallway table, and listened to the familiar quiet. For the first time in months, it did not feel like a place I had to fight to keep. It felt like mine. The first thing I did after the court transferred the house to me was not celebrate. I cleaned. Denise arrived at 9 on Saturday morning, wearing old jeans, work gloves, and the determined expression she had carried through every difficult season of our friendship. She brought coffee trash bags and a radio that played old songs softly in the kitchen. "You sure you want to do this today?" she asked when I opened the door. "No," I told her, "but I need to." The house had been returned to me legally, but it did not yet feel completely mine. There were boxes in the hallway, labels in Ethan's handwriting, empty spaces on the walls where family photographs had been removed, small signs everywhere that someone had treated my life as if it could be packed, sorted, donated, or thrown away. I wanted those signs gone. We began in the living room. Denise dusted the shelves while I opened boxes one at a time. My sweaters. The quilt Daniel's mother had made. Old photo albums. The ceramic bowl Ethan painted in kindergarten with one side collapsed because he had pressed too hard into the clay. On the bottom, in uneven letters, he had written, "Mom." I almost put it in the trash bag. Instead, I wrapped it in newspaper and placed it on the highest shelf of the hallway closet. That was my first boundary. I did not have to destroy every memory of my son to protect myself from him. By lunchtime, the house looked less like a storage room and more like a home. Denise hung the family photographs back in the hallway. I placed Daniel's old chair beside the front window. I washed every dish in the kitchen cabinets because I needed the simple comfort of putting my own hands on my own things. That afternoon, the locksmith returned to install a security deadbolt and new garage codes. I watched him test every lock. Then he handed me a small ring of keys. There were 3. One for me, one for the spare lockbox hidden behind the porch planter, and one I planned to keep in my bedside drawer. No key would be given out because someone felt entitled to it. No key would be given out because someone used guilt as a reason. I placed the ring in my pocket and felt something settle inside me. A week later, Caleb came to visit. Melissa brought him on a Sunday afternoon. They parked at the curb and she stood on the porch for several seconds before she rang the bell. When I opened the door, Caleb rushed forward and hugged me around the waist. "Your house smells like Grandma's house again," he said. I laughed and then I cried. Melissa looked embarrassed. "He means the cinnamon," she said. "You always bake. I know what he means, I told her. Caleb came inside holding a folded piece of notebook paper. He handed it to me with both hands. I made you something. It was a drawing of my red brick house. The maple tree leaned across the roof. The front porch had white railings. There were 3 figures outside: Caleb, me, and Denise. In the corner, he had written, "This is Grandma's safe place." I pressed the picture against my chest. It's beautiful, I said. I wanted you to put it somewhere people can see it. I will. I taped it to the refrigerator beside the old magnet Daniel had brought home from a business trip. Before they left, Melissa stayed behind while Caleb waited in the car. I owe you another apology, she said. You already apologized. I know. But I need you to know I'm not expecting you to forgive me because I said it. I've started meeting with a counselor, she continued. Caleb is too. I'm trying to make sure he knows none of this was his fault. I nodded. That is a good start. I also filed for a temporary parenting arrangement, she said quietly. Ethan can see Caleb, but the visits are structured for now. No overnight visits until he gets help and things are calmer. The words made me sad, but not uncertain. Caleb needs calm, I said. He has seen enough adults pretending chaos is normal. Melissa looked down. I should have stopped it sooner. Yes, I said. But you are stopping it now, I added. That matters. For the next several weeks, Caleb visited every Sunday. I learned that healing does not always look like laughter. Sometimes it looks like a child feeling safe enough to be quiet. Ethan did not come to the house. Jonathan told me that Ethan had entered financial counseling and agreed to cooperate with the bank's investigation. His business had closed. He was selling equipment, setting up repayment plans, and meeting with a legal aid advisor about the consequences of the loan application. When I heard those things, I felt relief for Caleb and Melissa. But I did not feel ready to welcome Ethan back into my life. One night I received an email from him. It was short. I started counseling. I know that doesn't fix what I did. I am trying to understand why I became someone who could do that to you. I won't come by or contact you unless you say it's okay. I read it twice. Then I placed my phone face down on the table. For years, I would have rushed to respond. I would have told him I was proud of him for trying. I would have wrapped comfort around him before he had learned to sit with what he had done. This time I waited. Not because I wanted him to suffer, because I wanted his change to belong to him, not to my forgiveness. The next morning, I walked through my house slowly. I opened the curtains. I watered the geraniums. I dusted Daniel's photograph beside the fireplace. Then I looked at Caleb's drawing on the refrigerator. This is Grandma's safe place. I finally understood that safety was not built by locks alone. It was built by truth, by limits. By knowing that love could remain in my heart without handing someone the power to hurt me again. And as the late afternoon light filled my kitchen, I knew I had not just taken my house back. I had taken my life back too. By Thanksgiving, the maple tree in my front yard had dropped almost every leaf. Its bare branches stood against a pale Ohio sky, and I could see the porch clearly from my kitchen window. Months earlier, that porch had been the place where Ethan told me I could not come home. I had stood there with a hospital bracelet on my wrist, my key useless in my hand, wondering how a person could be made to feel homeless in the life she had built. Now I was standing in the same kitchen, basting a turkey. The house smelled like rosemary butter cinnamon and the sweet potatoes Caleb insisted I make with too many marshmallows. My table was set for 4, me, Denise, Melissa, and Caleb. It was a small Thanksgiving, and that was exactly what I wanted. Melissa arrived before noon with a pumpkin pie. Caleb ran ahead of her in the navy sweater I had bought for his birthday. He stopped in the hallway to study the family photographs. You put them all back, he said. I did. He pointed to the old picture of Daniel and me in front of the house on the day we moved in. Grandpa looks young. He was young, I said. But he knew what mattered. Then Caleb rushed to the kitchen and asked whether he could stir the gravy. I gave him a wooden spoon and stood beside him while he worked with the seriousness of a surgeon. It was the first time in a long while that I heard him laugh without checking an adult's face to see whether it was safe. That laugh was better than any court ruling. Denise arrived with green beans and sparkling cider. She moved around my kitchen like she belonged there, which she did. You look happy, she said. I look tired, I answered. You can be both. Healing did not mean I woke every morning forgetting what happened. Some nights I still checked the lock twice. Sometimes a car slowing outside made my heart jump, but fear no longer ran my house. It only reminded me why my boundaries mattered. Melissa and I were still learning how to speak honestly. She had moved into a modest rental near Caleb's school, attended counseling, and never asked me to rush forgiveness. Instead, she showed up. She brought Caleb for Sunday dinners. She called when something difficult happened instead of pretending it was fine. She listened when I said no. That was how trust began again, not with grand speeches, but with small choices repeated over time. While Caleb helped Denise arrange roles, Melissa stood beside me at the counter. "I got an update from Ethan's counselor," she said quietly. "He's still going every week. He is working part-time with a construction crew. He's paying what he can toward the debts. Does he want something from me?" Melissa took an envelope from her purse. "He wrote this. He asked me to give it to you only if I thought you were ready." My name was written across the front in Ethan's handwriting. I slipped it into the pocket of my cardigan without opening it. Ethan was not invited to Thanksgiving. That was not revenge. It was a boundary. Some people think forgiveness means restoring every relationship to the way it was before, but I had learned that the past could not be rebuilt by pretending it never broke. Ethan needed to live with the distance he created. He needed to learn that an apology was a doorway, not a key. After dinner, Caleb and I washed dishes while Denise and Melissa packed leftovers. "Grandma," he asked. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Dad is going to be okay?" I dried my hands and looked at him. "I think he can be okay, but he has to choose it every day, like practicing baseball." Exactly like that. And if he stops practicing, then he has to start again. He thought about that. I hope he practices. So do I. When they left, Caleb hugged me twice, once at the door, then again after he had climbed into Melissa's car. "I forgot one more," he said. I held him close. "Never forget those," I told him. The house became quiet after their taillights disappeared down the street. Denise had gone home. The dishes were done. I carried Ethan's letter to the living room and sat in Daniel's chair. Outside, the porch light glowed over the same steps where I had once begged my son to let me enter. I opened the envelope. The letter was only 1 page. Ethan did not blame his business, his stress, Melissa, the bank, or me. For the first time, he wrote plainly. He said he had spent months trying to understand how he became willing to treat his own mother like an obstacle. He said losing the house forced him to see that he had tried to escape responsibility by placing it on everyone else. He apologized for the locks, the lies, the papers, and the fear he caused Caleb. At the bottom, he wrote one sentence that made me close my eyes. "I do not expect you to forgive me yet. I only hope that one day I can become someone you feel safe speaking to again." I folded the letter slowly. I did not call him. Not that night. Maybe not for a long time. But I placed the letter in the blue folder beside Daniel's note, not because Ethan had earned forgiveness, but because he had finally taken the first step toward accountability. And accountability was the only road that could ever lead him back to trust. Before bed, I walked through the house and turned off the lights. I paused at the front door and checked the lock once. Only once. Then I slipped the spare key into my pocket. It was a small piece of metal, but it had come to mean more than access to a house. It meant I had a choice. I could open my door to love, kindness, and people who respected me, and I could keep it closed to anyone who believed my love made me easy to control. That was the lesson Daniel had tried to leave me. Love is not surrender. Forgiveness is not permission. And a boundary is not a wall built to keep the world out. It is a door you choose to open only for those who know how to enter with respect. If you have ever had to set a boundary with someone you loved, remember this. Protecting your peace does not make you cruel. It means you finally understand that your life, your home, and your voice belong to you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Would you have read Ethan's letter that night or waited like I did? And if this story reminded you that it is never too late to stand up for yourself, please like, subscribe, and join me for the next story.